So good to have you join us today on this edition of Business Daily. I'm Lee Ji-eun in Seoul. Let's get started by looking at today's highlights. After wrapping up her East Africa tour, President Park Geun-hye is visiting France to boost economic cooperation and celebrate a new milestone. We'll sit down with an expert to talk about what we can expect from the president's trip. Korean samgyetang or ginseng chicken soup gets ready to enter the Chinese market this month amid growing popularity for this hearty soup overseas. These stories and more coming right up. But first, the negative news on the trade front continues to roll in, with Korea's exports on a downward spiral for the longest period ever now. But in what could be a reason for hope, the pace of decline in May slowed to its lowest level so far this year. Our Kim Min-ji reports.
Korea's exports took another dive in May, extending the downward trend to a record 17th straight month. The Trade Ministry says outbound shipments fell 6% from a year ago to $39.8 billion. Despite the negative growth, the pace of decline was the slowest since November of last year. This year, exports have posted double-digit drops every month, with the exception of March.
Despite weak external conditions, there was a turnaround in exports of computers, home appliances and petrochemicals, as well as an improvement in shipments of semiconductors and auto parts.
Imports tumbled 9.3% on year to $32.7 billion, also falling for the 17th straight month. With that, the trade surplus in May came to $7.1 billion, extending the surplus streak to 52 months or well over 4 years. As with previous months, what's worrisome is that the surpluses have mainly been driven by a sharp decrease in imports, rather than an uptick in exports. The prospects for exports in June aren't so bright due to uncertainty stemming from a possible rate hike in the U.S. and the outcome of the OPEC meeting this week. Kim Min-ji, Business Daily.
Korea's inflation rate slowed last month as price gains in fresh foods stabilized and the cost of utilities fell. Statistics Korea says consumer prices rose 0.8% in May from a year earlier, down from the 1% growth posted in April. The prices of agricultural goods rose over 1% last month, slowing from the 5.5% growth posted in April. Petroleum products continue to pull prices down overall, falling over 11% from a year ago. Core inflation, which excludes volatile food and oil products, however, was up 1.6%. President Park Geun-hye has wrapped up her three-nation East Africa trip and is visiting Paris. Seoul sealed scores of deals to help Korean firms enter Africa, considered the last blue ocean in the global economy. Our Song Ji-sun reports from Nairobi.
Korea's 76 economic MOUs with Ethiopia, Uganda, and Kenya are mostly aimed at expanding trade, investment, and helping the East African countries upgrade their infrastructure. The three biggest economies in East Africa function as a gateway not only to Africa, but to other regions like the US and the European Union through regional free trade pacts like the East African Community and the TFTA. Seoul did not underestimate the potential of the continent with an annual growth of 5%. It can prepare with customized plans based on the characteristics and needs of each country.
In Ethiopia, we'll build a Korean textile complex in line with the country's drive to foster a related industry. In the case of Uganda, our focus was set on agricultural development based on Semaul Undong. For Kenya, which is seeking to increase power generation, we've established cooperation in building energy infrastructure.
At 101 business sessions between Korean companies and local buyers, 43 deals worth nearly $70 million were sealed. The three African countries also saw eye to eye with President Park on the importance of industrial zones for economic growth. During President Park's trip there, Kenya announced its plans to build its own Korean-style complex. President Park cemented cooperation for mutual growth with the East African countries. Park's focus will now shift for the growth for the future, en route to Paris, where Presidents Park and François Hollande will seek ways to foster a creative economy. Song Ji-sun, Business Daily, Nairobi.
President Park Geun-hye is visiting France with a business delegation made up of more than 100 companies. And though the two countries have enjoyed friendly ties for 130 years, trade with the European powerhouse is an area with greater growth potential. We'll dive into this with an expert, but first, take a look.
Korea and France forged diplomatic ties in 1886. And during the Korean War, France sent 3,400 ground troops to fight as part of the UN command. Calling France an old friend, President Park Geun-hye is visiting the European country with a business delegation of 101 firms related to everything from IT to biotechnology, medical supplies, and beauty. The focus is future growth, as France is a country with strong knowledge-intensive industries, home to some of the world's top space science and nuclear firms. But as only 0.5% of Korean exports head to France and 1.4% of imports come from the country, there are hopes to further strengthen bilateral trade and cooperation. During her trip, President Park will hold a summit meeting with French President Francois Hollande. She'll also attend a KCON event, receive an honorary doctorate from the University of Paris 6, and pay a visit to Grenoble City where she once studied, before heading home on Sunday.
And to tell us more about this, Professor Lee Do-won from Yonsei University joins us in the studio today. So good to see you, Professor.
Good to be here.
All right, so this year marks the 130-year anniversary of diplomatic ties between Korea and France. With that, what kind of economic relationship does Korea have with France, and what significance does this 130-year anniversary hold for the two countries?
Well, even though it has been 130 years, the more meaningful encounter between France and Korea actually began after the end of the Korean War. But after the end of the Korean War, the economic ties between the two countries, both in trade and investment, were growing steadily, but not too fast until today. And we had a couple of turning points. In 2011, as you know, we had the Korea-EU FTA. And then in 2013, when President Park Geun-hye visited France, both sides agreed to set up comprehensive relationship, comprehensive partner relationship. And then this year would be another turning point because France has designated 2016 as Korea year and vice versa in Korea. So I think that this will be another good turning point, another cornerstone when we can expand our relationship.
Now, aside from the ones that you just mentioned, what are some other notable exchanges between the two countries?
Well, the biggest exchange would be trade and investment in terms of the economics. We tried to make advantage of the Korea-EU FTA in 2011, but coincidentally, we had global economic crisis after 2008. So it seems like that the more positive impact of Korea-EU FTA has to be weighted a little bit. However, if you look at the recent figures, especially in trade, the total volume of trade had been almost tripled in 20 years. And Korea's import from France got doubled in 10 years. And that would be a meaningful progress.
Now, there are also big expectations for President Park Geun-hye's trip to France this time around and its economic impact because despite the slowing global economy, Swiss bank UBS recently raised its growth forecast for France for this year. So how is the French economy doing?
You know, the French economy was fairly resilient even after the 2008 global financial crisis. The French economy did not enjoy economic boom, but at least it did not go through severe recession, just like the other European countries. And that would be another positive aspect of the French economy. It's fairly resilient. The bad news is they have some problems in labor market and also in the government budget. The labor market unemployment rate was hovering around 10%, and it seldom went below 10%. And then government budget. Government budget deficit was around somewhere between 3% and 5%. And it actually has correlation with the labor market because if you have many unemployed people, government have to spend more money to support those unemployed people. However, other than that, the growth prospect is relatively speaking, positive compared to the other European countries.
And President Park also picked France as the best partner to realize creative economy and cultural enrichment. What is this based upon?
Well, in terms of the creative economy, we need to pay more attention to the science and technology of France. Now, traditionally speaking, France had a fairly strong tradition in terms of the basic science and basic technology, which is exactly what Korea needs. And on top of that, in recent years, France was trying to boost up the startup businesses. That can be another good implication to Korea as well.
Well, you just mentioned it, but during the president's visit, Korea and France are actually expected to step up support for their respective startups to advance into each other's countries. Now, what is the startup scene like in France, and what would this mutual exchange mean for the two countries then?
Well, the startup business environment in France in recent years were very positive. And they actually combined a lot of high-tech industries with old traditional sectors. And that's a very good sign. And also they enjoy very strong and firm support from the government. Government tried to help those young startup businesses with tax benefits and also lots of government fund to support them. That would be another good factor. And in terms of the mutual benefit between Korea and France, if you look at the industrial structure, not just the startup businesses, but overall industrial structure, France and Korea is fairly complementary with each other. We have what they don't have, and they have what we don't have. And so by exchanging and boosting up the exchange in terms of this complementary nature, I think we can get benefit.
All right, well, let's shift our focus a little bit from President Park's visit to Korea and its own labor reforms. I know you mentioned a little bit earlier about labor reforms, but there are mass protests against labor reforms ongoing in France, and the French government is not backing down from its planned reform. So what can Korea take note of as it pushes forward with its own reforms now?
Yeah. The situation in the French labor market is really, really serious. There's no time for the French government to delay the reform. The real problem would be, of course, unemployment.
Right.
The average unemployment rate is about 10%, but if you look at the unemployment rate in the young population, that's more than double the average. So unless France tackle this unemployment problem, it will be difficult to accelerate the growth and also to reduce the government budget deficit. And because of this situation, they are pushing hard to change the labor market. Basically, the essence of the labor market reform is to make labor market more flexible. And that's the lesson we need to draw from the French labor market reform effort. Once you make labor market rigid, it's fairly difficult to change it back to flexible.
Right.
We can see it from the strong demonstration on the street of Paris. So we need to be careful not to make our labor market as rigid as France.
All right, well, with 130 years behind the two countries now, how should Korea and France take things to a new level in the future?
Well, there are many areas that we can expand, in terms of the culture, science and technologies, and also educations. In almost every area, our mutual exchange between the two countries were limited so far. So it'll be a good opportunity to take advantage of this turning point to expand our exchange into the new area. And of course, we should enlarge our existing cooperation between France and Korea.
Let's hope to see more of that in the future. Thank you so much for coming in today,
Thank you.
Professor. Korean ginseng chicken soup or samgyetang producers are one step away from shipping out their hearty dish to Chinese consumers. It's been a long way coming, but now the dish will finally find its way into China's kitchens sometime this month. Our Lee Ju-young has more.
This was a scene near the banks of Hangang River early in May, when Seoul City invited 8,000 Chinese tourists to taste Korea's traditional ginseng chicken soup or samgyetang.
Maybe it's because I'm from China, but I like hearty food. It's the first time I'm trying this soup, and I like the novelty of it.
And the good news for those who are now hooked on the rich chicken soup, from sometime this month, Korean companies are expected to start exporting ready-to-eat meals for fans in the Middle Kingdom. Seoul's Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs successfully finished the core procedures for registering 11 samgyetang plants with the Chinese government back in April and completed all follow-up quarantine and sanitary procedures last month. The final step is for companies to receive the green light for labeling their goods, and once that's done, producers will be able to start exporting to China, an achievement that has been 10 years in the making. Following this announcement, stock prices of some of the country's largest poultry processing firms like Harim and Dongwoo have soared on the Kosdaq index. Last year, Korea reaped roughly $9.5 million from samgyetang exports to countries like the US, Taiwan, and Japan. And for China, Seoul hopes to ship out 5 million tons, or $3 million worth in the first year of sales, and eventually bring that figure up to $10 million annually down the line. 이주영, Business Daily.
And that brings us to the end, but we'll be back tomorrow at the same time, same place for your Business Daily, so don't forget to tune in then. Thanks for watching and see you soon.